9/9/2019, 11:53:27 a.m. From Chad. Well, I've had an interesting morning. I felt I should burn all of the limb debris by the fire pit before it got too soaked by the coming storms. While I did so, I spotted a big raccoon along the fence. I hurried and got my gun, and he was still walking along. I got close enough that one shot did the trick. He is now in our pet cemetery. Fun times.
Hey folks, 18 people have testified in the Lori Vallow Daybell murder trial up in Boise, Idaho. Is the prosecution convincing you that Lori is guilty of murdering her two children, her fifth husband's wife, Tammy, and of course, there's always that looming question about her husband, Charles Vallow. Now, he's not part of the trial, but he might be in the following trials. Let's recap and talk about the infamous weekend at Lori's. Well, welcome everybody to Profiling Evil. I've been weighing in on this case all week on Court TV, and I'm going to be continuing to do so from time to time, but I'm dialing in for the next couple of weeks from Scotland and Great Britain, heading back to check my family roots. Now, if you're from London, you're going to recognize the tunnel at the Waterloo station. This is the one just below the station to the west. I'm including some of my favorite highlights in this particular reel, and I hope that you'll watch my other videos on Daybell, the murder investigation, and now Lori Daybell's trial. So please hit that like and subscribe button and ring the bell. I don't know if you've ever watched the movie Weekend at Bernie's, and hopefully you saw the parody in my thumbnail for this particular video. I'm dedicating the Lori Daybell thumbnails now to this theme of hand-drawn renditions based on what's happening in the courtroom. I hope that this silliness of not allowing the trial to be videoed is going to end with Lori's case, and that when the trial comes around for Chad, that they actually let courtrooms have cameras back in them. It's going to be interesting to be able to watch Chad's in real time on video if they'll let us do it. Now, I'm going to focus this particular video on an investigative principle called staging. Usually this is a scenario where the offender or offenders, in this particular case perhaps, manipulate the crime scene to make it appear to be something other than it really is. Now, that wasn't necessarily the case in this particular episode of Weekend at Lori's, but instead, I think the staging is suggesting that there was pre-planning, in effect, alibi building that was going on. Now, if I'm right, the entire weekend was probably orchestrated to prove a couple of things. First, that JJ was being cared for in a loving home, albeit that he was personally acting out in Lori's testimony to her friends. In her words, because he was under the influence of some demonic spirit. Can you imagine that? This little child, 7 years old. Now remember, she tells several people that he was acting out. He was acting possessed, climbing on the refrigerator and destroying Lori's property. In testimony that we heard this week related by friends, JJ got so bad, according to what Lori was telling the friends, that she had to go get good old Uncle Alex to come and take him away. And if the prosecution's right, take him away is an understatement. Now, staging a crime scene involves trying to alter the crime scene to make it appear that it was really different than it truly was. I believe staging was more about creating a mindset that, number one, JJ was possessed. Now, the flaw in that thinking is that it still doesn't explain why this small boy suddenly disappeared. But the fact that JJ was possessed and given to Alex does separate Lori from the actual act of murder if the allegation is that he was murdered in Alex's care. Now, the problem for Lori, in my opinion, in that particular scenario is it doesn't take into account that David Warwick would be spending the weekend there, and that in the middle of the night he'd have nightmares that waked him up and had him wishing he had some spiritual support. They leaned on Lori and Chad for that spiritual support, but they were nowhere to be found. In fact, Lori's bedroom door was even locked when they tried to reach her in the same house where JJ was supposed to be. More importantly, it doesn't explain, after everything unfolds and JJ's presumably murdered, or at least missing at this point, why Lori doesn't go to police. Instead, it appears that she cleared out the apartment, left for Hawaii, and married Chad Daybell just a few weeks after his wife mysteriously died. Now, I'm mentioning all of this at the start of the video because it takes a particular type of criminal, in my opinion, to set up staging successfully. That means it takes a criminal that is somewhat organized and has thought through the process. If this was all about establishing an alibi, this shows premeditation, in my opinion. Now, I'm still trying to wrap my mind around what was going on in this relationship between Melanie Gibb and her now husband, then dating David Warwick. You see, on the night that JJ was murdered, the two were dating, and as luck would have it, or as misfortune might, they were staying the night in Lori Vallow's apartment. Lori Vallow then, Lori Daybell now. That is an apartment in Rexburg, Idaho. Warwick testified this week that the last time he saw JJ was on September 22nd, 2019, during that long weekend at Lori's with his soon-to-be wife, Melanie. Now, I spent much of tonight's broadcast on Court TV reflecting on the weekend. To start the conversation, Vinnie Politan asked me what I thought about Lori's interaction with Rexburg police when they first came to her home to do that welfare check on JJ. Now remember, Kay Woodcock initiated the call with Rexburg police because she had suddenly been cut off from communication with her grandson. So let's start off by listening to that conversation with police. But keep in mind, police have been looking for JJ for a number of days at this time. In fact, we learned this week during the trial that police actually knew that Lori and Chad were in a relationship, evidenced by the day when police followed the pair as they drove from Rexburg to Idaho Falls. It's about a 30-mile drive, 30 minutes on the freeway. Once Lori and Chad arrived in Idaho Falls, investigators witnessed them holding hands and walking into stores. Imagine the investigators' surprise when they finally interviewed Lori and they asked her about the two men that they talked to at the house. And Lori said, "My brother and his friend." They pushed harder. And when they said, "Who's the friend?" she said, "Chad." Acted like she didn't really even know who the guy was. A major red flag started to unfurl. Let's listen to that conversation.
Let me bring back in our guest. We've got Chanley Painter, of course, with us, Court TV legal correspondent. She's outside the courthouse. Also joining us tonight from Los Angeles, senior reporter for DailyMail.com, Caitlin Becker, and from Salt Lake City, Utah, religious cult expert, retired police commander, host of the Profiling Evil podcast, and author of Deceived, Mike King is with us. Mike King, hold that thought, so I know you're ready. We'll be back.
He was just saying that he wanted to do a well to everything.
So, JJ would be where?
He's in Arizona.
Who's he with in Arizona?
He's with one of my friends in Arizona. He's my son. I adopted him.
Right.
He's 2 years. We had him from the time he was 8 months old till 2 years old. She does nothing that wants to cause me trouble. So I don't tell people the truth about where we're going, what we're doing, because of those reasons. So I look like a suspect, but I've been crazy. Raised all of my kids. I've done everything that I'm supposed to do in life. But that's what's causing me trouble right now. So.
We don't want to cause trouble.
And our only concern in this whole thing is the child.
I got it.
And so that's where we're at on the. And then we were just a little weirded out when, you know, and I understand now that we've heard your side of the story.
It's awful. I feel like I'm being tracked all the time. Like, why are police coming to my door? What did I do?
They said you're out visiting two guys. And I was assuming one's your brother?
Who was this? Yeah.
Who was the other one? The other guy didn't listen. There's two. Well, We had two detectives over here trying to,
Looking for you a little while ago.
Oh, because I was at the store.
and they ran into probably one of your brothers in
My
the back.
brother and his friend, probably.
Who's
Didn't
that?
with me. Chad.
My brother's friend. All right, Caitlin Becker, senior reporter, dailymail.com. Mike King, Profile Evil podcast. All right, Mike, this is Lori Daybell. This is her explanations, and this is the moment that the heat is on now because police are involved looking for her son.
Yeah, and what's really powerful here is that police know that she and Chad are an item. They watched her and Chad in Idaho Falls walking hand in hand. They now have got that perfect moment, and she says to him, oh, by the way, I'm a liar, because she says, oh, no, it's just my brother's friend, Chad. And that to me is very significant. You know, well, I then took the opportunity to talk about something we've chatted on Profiling Evil about in the Academy in the past. It's the subject of pre-planning. Now, you can learn a whole lot more about these investigative principles that I talk about by visiting my playlist, The Academy. While you're there checking those out, I hope you'll consider joining the Academy and becoming an Academy level channel member. It's really a place where you can financially support Profiling Evil, but more importantly, you'll be the first to receive new pieces of information, sometimes information that doesn't go to anybody else. But since we're talking about Daybell's cult influence in this case, I decided to share what I'd learned about some cult characteristics after investigating cults for so many years. Now, this is going to build a foundation for the rest of our video today, and it has to do with the timing of when a criminal act occurs, when it actually is formed in the mind, the decision to make it. Now, this is going to tie to my earlier comments about premeditation and put into layman's terms how the offender justifies the act. So it's going to be in several steps: the creation of it in the mind and then the physically acting it out. Let's watch. Okay, you know, and I wanted to step back on something about, you were talking about these cult leaders. I want to go cult leader on you for just a second, Vinny. A cult leader, and then I'll go criminologist. A cult leader will twist scriptures to fit their needs. And, you know, think about it. The Bible teaches that all things are created spiritually and then physically. In the criminal mind, it works really off the same principle. I like this old saying I was taught as I was learning how to be a profiler. It's called Sun Yippee Chi, that says, eyes see and ears hear what's already in the mind. Or in other words, the crime's justified up here before it's physically acted out. And now I think we're seeing all of the damage control going on. This envisioning stage doesn't have a time frame that's attached to it. Sometimes it's quick. Sometimes it takes a long time to put the thing together. But conjuring up the idea and justifying it in the mind has to occur before it can physically be acted out. Now, this can happen in an instance or over time, but it needs to be set in motion before the events occur. It has to be mentally decided and then physically decided. There's no "the devil made me do it." It is an overt act. Now, let me make this a little easier to understand by explaining a personal event that happened when I fired my weapon in the line of duty as a police officer. I was working as a SWAT officer, and we were trying to capture an armed man who had taken a woman hostage, and he was driving down a local canyon. Now, a witness to the hostage taking was following the suspect from behind and communicating with law enforcement on her mobile phone. The suspect didn't know that he was being followed and didn't know that we, police, were setting up a fake accident scene at the mouth of the canyon where we hoped to force the vehicle into kind of a small funnel where the vehicles would be channeled past the accident scene. Our hope was to barricade the predator as he got inside of our controlled tunnel where we could then effectively and safely take him into custody. Well, as he approached, I was standing in the road with ski bibs on, acting like I had just come home from skiing when the accident occurred. I was flagging traffic down, trying to slow it down. Well, unfooled, the predator stomped on the gas and started his vehicle toward me, attempting to run me over. In an instant, I had to make the decision to pull out my weapon, point it at him, and motion him to stop. Lizzie continued toward me, attempting to run me over. He pulled the hostage that he had with him in front of his face and body across the vehicle and held the gun up to her head as he drove by. My mindset had to change from taking him out to taking the vehicle out. And with that change of target, I shot the front tire out of the vehicle and jumped out of the way as he passed by. Now, I crashed into a nearby home, and we were able to quickly take him into custody and rescue the hostage. I'm showing this old glory days photo when I was much younger and was a SWAT officer. And as you look at this photo of me at the time, posing with his crash car, I want to share how this story applies to the principle of first creating in the mind and then justifying shooting my weapon and actually shooting that weapon in the discharge of my duties. So here it is. For years leading up to that event, I had trained for hundreds and hundreds of hours on the use of deadly force. I understood the law, and I knew that when certain things happened, I was justified in pulling my weapon and in shooting the weapon if I needed to. There were only milliseconds between the predator's attempt to run me over and the reaction time to shoot that weapon and stop the predator's aggressive, lethal actions. Now, in this example, hopefully you can see that the actual event of discharging my duty weapon in the line of duty was reconciled and justified long before I actually pulled the trigger. There was no real thinking at that particular moment, only reaction and muscle memory. My options were exhausted, and I shot in order to preserve my life and the life of that victim. The decision or that justification was actually made years earlier. Now let's just set back to the discussion around Lori Vallow Daybell and whether there was pre-planning in the death of J.J. Vallow. Remember, Tylee's now already deceased. Charles Vallow is already deceased. And while we're not talking about him, Joe Ryan is now deceased. Whether that was murder or actually a normal cause of life events, that's to be determined. Then, shortly after, Tammy Daybell will mysteriously die. So why on earth did I end up calling this particular video Weekend at Lori's? Well, this was very significant in my opinion, and I hope if the prosecution thinks about this the way I do, that they'll really drive the following points home. First, the question comes up about whether JJ's murder was planned or if it just happened at the same time that Melanie Gibb and David Warwick were visiting in her home. Keep in mind that Warwick already had plans to stay somewhere else rather than in Lori's apartment now. If I remember correctly, he was actually going to stay in a hotel or with his son in another community nearby. But the engaged couple was convinced to stay at Lori's house instead because Tylee was at school, so her room was available, and JJ could go into Lori's room, so they had a room to use. Well, Warwick, out of luck, I think, had a rough night for some reason. And when Melanie tried to get him some spiritual support from Chad and Lori, she was unable to find either one of them. In fact, she checks Lori's door, and the door is locked. Lori doesn't answer the door, doesn't answer when she's knocking, and doesn't respond to text messages that she's sending to Lori and Chad seeking help. This left me wondering if Lori was even home at that time, and frankly, if JJ was even in the home at that time. Remember, Alex brought him into the house earlier, slumped over his shoulder, and apparently asleep. I still wonder, was this kid alive at that point? Was he not? This question continues to bug me, and I wonder what your thoughts are on this one, and I hope that you'll enter them down below and then catch my response to Vinnie Politan about that very question.
Mike, what are your thoughts about going back to the weekend, right? So they've invited people to the house, and this is the weekend of the murder. And I know that it seems like they're trying to recruit David Warwick into this cult, and that's part of what's happening that weekend. But are you surprised that this would be the weekend that the life of JJ would be taken. The fact that outsiders, but maybe they're not considered outsiders because, you know, kind of Melanie Gibb was kind of one of the followers.
Yeah, I'm so glad you pulled us back to that, Vinny, because I was just chomping at the bit last time you talked about it. There's a couple things I think are really significant. Number one, I don't believe it was happen chance. I don't believe this happened at the last second. We talk about in criminal cases staging, and I know you've prosecuted these cases where you've laid out the staging and the display that goes on. What a perfect way for them to have this loving scenario, whether JJ is alive when he's taken up the stairs by Alex, whether he's subdued by medication, or whether the kid's just tuckered out. But what a tender moment they all talked about. But the interesting thing was, hey, come to my house. Oh, no, I know you can stay at a hotel, but stay at my house tonight. And everything lays this groundwork to say, look, there's a perfect alibi. But Chanley brought something really important out, and that was that she wasn't there when they knocked on the door. They didn't answer when they were texting him in the middle of the night. I don't know why this guy had a spooky dream, but I'm sure glad he did, because what it did is revealed a little bit of a chink in the armor, and I think it goes back to staging, and I don't think it was just by chance that it happened that weekend. Well, hey, folks, I'm pausing to share some concerns I have surrounding identity theft and fraud. I've learned a lot from our partner, Aura. They're the pros at protecting people from cyber predators. Aura provides identity theft protection, credit and fraud protection, and online and device security for you and your family. They taught me to think twice before answering those online questionnaires designed to steal our personal information. You know, it must be working, because U.S. statistics show that 33% of us have been victimized by identity theft at an annual cost of more than $56 billion each year. Aura protection plans come with around-the-clock support, a money-back guarantee, and $1 million theft policy. But here's the best part. You can try Aura for free by clicking on this special Profiling Evil link in the description down below. When you do, we get a small commission. But think about it. You insure your car and you insure your house. Don't you think it's time to insure your identity? Now let's get back to today's discussion. Yeah, and then don't forget that Warwick testifies that the next morning he asks Lori to get JJ so that he can say goodbye to him. Now, Warwick felt some type of a connection to little Joshua when he learned that Joshua had autism like his son. Lori told Warwick that JJ was unavailable, that he was acting up in the night and in the morning, so she had her uncle, or her brother, Alex, JJ's uncle, come and take him away. In fact, she tells him that he was climbing on the fridge and destroying pictures and shouting out things to support the idea that he was possessed. I found it really interesting during the weekend at Lori's that Warwick also had a talk with Chad Daybell during that time, and Chad told him that his wife Tammy was a good wife, but he had a dream that revealed that she wasn't going to live much longer. In fact, she'd be gone before Chad turned 50. Chad apparently told him, quote, her time was coming and he and Lori were going to do the things they committed to God, close quote. Warwick didn't seem surprised when Tammy was reported dead a month later. Well, I started off this video reading a text of Chad Daybell where he sent information about building a fire in the backyard and shooting a raccoon and then burying it in their pet cemetery. The text was sent the day after Tylee Ryan was last seen alive. Now remember, Tylee was dismembered and burned and buried on the property. That same piece of property where JJ was discovered, buried, wrapped in plastic, and bound by duct tape. We spent a little more time on Court TV talking about Chad's profession as a gravedigger and his fascination with all things dead. We read a few excerpts of his book, 1 Foot in the Grave, and we talked about the interesting characteristics of this particular murder case. Let's catch that little segment where Caitlin Becker from the Daily Mail and I chat about it with Vinnie Politan.
Let's bring back in our guest, Caitlin Becker, Mike King. Caitlin, I was watching your face during this. This is, strange stuff. Let me ask you, Mike, do you think there's an obsession with death by this gravedigger, Chad Daybell?
It sure makes you wonder, doesn't it? And the thing that's so interesting is the way in which these children were buried. Vinny. I go back to the fact that, for instance, JJ was buried with stones placed over the top and then wood. That's an effort, in my opinion, to keep predators, animals from digging up that grave, because they certainly can smell that. I think that there was a lot of expertise going into this. And frankly, when you read that little email or text that he sends to Tammy, it's almost a victorious little text as well. And kind of a way these predators send the message out and tell people, because they really want to tell people, but they have to be so clandestine about it.
Caitlin, it was clearly the longest text message anyone would ever send, right? Like, it was like a little too detailed.
It was really rambling on and just too much information, too many details, plus raccoons are nocturnal. So what was it doing wandering around the property in the middle of the day? It struck me as so bizarre. And Tammy's response is so indicative of the kind of conversations I think they usually have. Good for you. 3 words, exclamation point, carry on with your day. It just stands out as such a contrast to all of that ridiculous rambling that he did in the previous text to sort of cover his tracks, as well as, I think Mike's exactly right, give him a kind of coded pat on the back. Look what I did. I did it well today. And what he allegedly did well was, burn Tylee's body.
Yeah. Chanley Painter spoke to folks in the neighborhood, Mike, and they spoke about, this time of year there was unusual number of these fires that were going on in the backyard. And I think one of them had to be, at least one of them had to involve Tylee's remains.
Yeah, the evidence sure points that way, doesn't it? And when you hear the testimony that's coming out about the fact that you have this 2-minute window when you chase a demon out of a zombie's body, you have that 2-minute window to get them sealed back up. And then one of the ways to get rid of them, if I remember everything correctly, was to burn them. And boy, oh boy, didn't they do that. Well, this whole weekend, in my opinion, was based solely on information I've been able to obtain through open source information, through things I've seen online just like you. But it tells me that this weekend at Lori's was staged. And as many other aspects of this case unfold, I think it's going to support that theory. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this one. So would you please take a moment and enter them down below? Make sure you're responding to other people's comments down below. And thanks so much for supporting us. And I hope you'll put down there what your thoughts are on this entire video. We're going to continue to explore cult behaviors as we try to make sense of what's going on in the Lori Daybell murder case. So make sure along the way that you've taken time to check out my story map on Chad and Lori Daybell. Hey folks, it's Mike from Profiling Evil, and I want to just take a quick minute to remind you about the Chad and Lori Daybell story map. You can find it at profilingevil.com under story maps, and I hope you'll go over and visit it. It gives you a chance to go through and kind of explore this case from beginning to end. Has all kinds of information about those first hearings, about what happened. But then I think one of the things that's pretty dang cool is it goes in and it talks about them individually. Not only has an overview, but it has a way to check out more about Lori, her former husbands, where she lived, Chad and his former wife, Tammy, and the circumstances leading up to her death. You can learn more about what light and dark is, according to them, and actually hear Chad speaking at one of those Preparing a People conferences. You can go into other family members like Stacy Cope, Joseph Ryan, Charles Vallow, Alex Cox, JJ and Tylee. You can look at the court processes, and you can get a little more information about Profiling Evil. So again, I hope you'll go back and check that out. Now let's get back to the program. Well, there you go, folks. Make sure you've hit that like and subscribe button so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. We're going to be coming from Scotland and England for the next couple of weeks. So please make sure you're tuning in and getting those notifications. I hope you'll consider joining our channel memberships. And you know, my favorite is the Academy level, where I think you get a whole lot more for just a little bit more. Your financial support really does help us, so thanks so much for supporting us and for supporting our sponsors. Check out Profiling Evil on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and of course, here on YouTube. And if you like audio podcasts, check out Profiling Evil on your favorite podcast platform. We just dropped a whole bunch of new ones in the Academy level series that I think you're going to enjoy. They're short, they're perfect for when you're running to the store or heading to Grandma's house. Thanks so much for your support, folks, and we'll see you all soon at the next crime scene.